So one interesting thing is us being able to see things, but I think another interesting thing is in order for you to see anything, you actually need light. You need to have light to be able to see. If there's no light, you can't perceive anything, and therefore you can't be insightful. So part of being insightful is actually having light. And the best form of light is actually Allah's words. And as you're speaking about these things that we know about Allah, this is what actually illuminates the world for us. This is actually what gives us that ability to have insight, because we wouldn't know that this dunya is just play and amusement unless Allah told us that. And this is the whole thing, that you become insightful by learning more about Allah, like you said, and more about His attributes and more about His deen.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to episode 4 of Transformation Mastery. So we have been talking about a few stages, looking at the book from Ibn Qayyim, Madarij al-Salikin. We have been taking a look at a summarized version of that, and then summarizing it even further and discussing with relevant topics that are well known in the self-development industry and all the modern concepts. So we have talked about awakening, yaqadha, or awakening, when a person starts thinking about it. Why am I here? What am I here for? That sort of awakening that happens within oneself. And then the notion of deep thinking. And today we'll be talking about insight and how deep insight lead to firm determination and will. So let's begin with that. So as we're talking about the concept of insight, Muhammad, I'd like you to start thinking about, or perhaps share some examples of, when you've seen someone truly focus on something, fully committed, 100% committed, what sort of insight is that person working with? So to get things started, like one of the things that I've recently seen where I'm seeing a lot of commitment, transformation, and trying to really reach the extremes is some of the guys that I train with. And they are in boxing or Muay Thai or kickboxing. And there's one young guy, right, who's like 20 years old. And he goes to university doing computer science, but along with that, he's like training twice a day. He travels like 40 minutes to come to a gym where he can train with experts and whatnot. And he is having his first fight today. So I hope he wins. But I've seen a lot of determination in this 20-year-old kid. The way he eats, the way he trains, the way he commutes just to come to the training twice a day. Perhaps 7 days a week. It's like really next level. But I mean, when I look at it, I'm like, where is this motivation coming from? So what I observe is, firstly, he's seeing results. So he's seeing that how he's able to do more than what he was able to do like a year ago or 5 years ago, and how he sees that, yes, my body is actually capable of doing more. And I think also staying and hanging out with these other people that he hangs out with, and you see that other people are able to do these things with their bodies, that means I should also be able to do this. Is like a limit that I can push myself to. And seeing those results, hanging out with those people, and having those things that, okay, look, if I commit to it, I will actually win the fight. I will do something. I will actually excel and, transform myself.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because I think one of the most important things a human being can do is actually become insightful. Because when I was looking at the definitions of insightful, what you realize is someone who's insightful actually has a clear and deep understanding of a topic. And it's interesting because you're talking about health, because I was speaking to my personal trainer yesterday, right? And I was telling him that when you take a protein shake, you take it with milk, it's more protein, right? So on the surface, it sounds like a good thing, right? Like milk with a protein powder, you get more protein. But then he said to me that, look, bro, think about it. Like if you put milk into something, it is harder for the body to absorb the protein. But if you use it with water, the water just goes straight through your body, and that protein that it takes in is actually much better than even if you took it with milk. And you might have a better result, right? So this just shows that when someone has a deep understanding of something, when they clearly know what something is, the level of results you get from that is actually very different, even though on the surface it might look different.
Great, beautiful. Yes, so I think like going into it, right? Obviously, like the work and the first and foremost, the most important transformation is our understanding of this world and who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and where do we sort of fit into that. So, taking a look at it like the way he describes it, and then we can go into like tangent examples as well, is he's saying that first of all, it's a light, it's a realization that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses someone with. So as we work on those early stages that we talked about of, yaqada, and having sort of deep thinking and love and connection with Allah, and the du'as and all the other topics that we have talked about it, because all these action points that we discussed, all the stages that we have discussed before, they need to continue as we traverse from one stage to the other. And as we do that, it's like you receive this insight, this gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which basically protects you from confusion. It gives you this clarity, it protects you from this confusion, and you do not have hesitation because you have certainty and you have insight, so you're not hesitating. And the way that he describes it is three things that we will inshallah talk about today. First of all, we'll be jumping into the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one thing that he's highlighting is that it's not just having this certainty and insight and belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, but rather also realize who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And that is very important, as we will see that as we talk about some of these attributes and how they're beneficial towards taking action and being persistent with those action. We'll wrap up with the Vasira, or the insight about the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leading to the Vasira, insight into the promises and warnings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that leads to this firm determination. So as we jump into it, it's the notion of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by his names and attributes. And I'll share a few that I captured from the summarized version of the book. And what we want to probably do is perhaps dive into it and think about how someone who is aware and conscious of these names and attributes will be acting differently than someone who is not sure or is not consciously aware of those things. So he goes into saying like a lot of beautiful stuff. Some of the stuff that I was able to capture is to realize that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above his throne. So if we are conscious of this, that he is up above everything else, and he is the one who actually spoke about his commands and prohibitions. He has full knowledge of everyone and everything. He knows their personalities. He knows their actions. He knows their efforts. He's listening to them as they make supplications to him. He's listening to their conversation, their planning, their efforts, their struggles. And he is the one who is managing the affairs of his entire kingdom, whether it be up in the heavens, down on earth, to under the sea, and so on and so forth. He's managing all those affairs. He has full control over them. And his commands are coming from him about every matter that is descending from him in terms of the decree, what will happen, what will be prevented from happening, who's going to be born, who's going to die, who's going to get sick or healthy or rise up in his status or go down, and so on and so forth. His angels being with him, carrying out his commands, all his attributes are of perfection, free from any deficiency, free from any similitude, and he is the maintainer of everything that exists. Nothing escapes his knowledge. He sees the movement of the black ant on a rock in a dark night. And all his actions are by his justice, by his wisdom, by his mercy, and all favors and bounty are from him, all praises are from him or for him, and all his creations are created with purpose. It's not a random, just a game, right? He gave them different sides and invited them to his love from all the different avenues that leads to his love, and he wrote down that his mercy precedes his anger. So, having said that, I would just like to perhaps reflect and think about like how someone who's waking up and having this consciousness of who Allah is and how this world is being run will be in a different state emotionally and also around their motivation and actions.
Yeah, great. I think some of the things that are coming to my mind after you're saying all of that is we're looking at being insightful, right? And when it comes to insightful, like I said, it means to have a deep and clear understanding of something. Now, in order for us to have a deep and clear understanding of something, we have to actually be able to see it, right? And a lot of the times Allah talks about in the Quran how people are seeing, and then there's people who are blind. And it's not real seeing, real blind, but it's a fact that when it comes to messages, they don't see. So one interesting thing is us being able to see things, but I think another interesting thing is in order for you to see anything, you actually need light. You need to have light to be able to see. If there's no light, you can't perceive anything, right? And therefore you can't be insightful. So part of being insightful is actually having light. And the best form of light is actually Allah's words, like you said, Allah's to know about Allah, to all these things. And as you're speaking about these things that we know about Allah, this is what actually illuminates the world for us. This is actually what gives us that ability to have insight, because we wouldn't know that this dunya is just play and amusement unless Allah told us that. And this is the whole thing, that you become insightful by learning more about Allah, like you said, and more about His attributes and more about His deen.
Beautiful. So I think as you were talking about this, needing this light and actually seeing it. So one of the things actually he mentioned, but I know I didn't mention it when I was talking, is that he has given different signs to the creation, right? So like he has given different doors that leads to his love. He's also given different signs and indicators to his existence and to who he is. But I think what's probably happening and what's probably blocking us is that we have sort of, even though we are not physically wearing these virtual reality goggles, it seems like we are, right? Because when we wake up and we see all these signs around us, we sort of do not reflect on that, and we just look, we are either too narrow-sighted or too much distracted with what's on the screen or what's on our VR goggles, if we were to say that. And this leads us to kind of missing out. But however, if we were to step back and then actually really appreciate what Allah has created and the nuances of it and the details of it, and how things work, and even in our own individual life, the life of our family, of different transitions, different things that are happening for us, and how Allah is blessing us in different angles, then we would potentially be able to realize that more and experience that more. And as you mentioned about if we were to connect with the Book of Allah, then we are reminded of who Allah is, right? So that's kind of giving you that knowledge, reconditioning you, affirming you that knowledge of who Allah is and all the different attributes that we talked about.
In marketing, we have this thing, it's called banner blindness. And what banner blindness is, that people are so used to seeing the banners that are flashing on websites in the old days when they had banners, that they basically became blind to them. And even though the banner is right there in your face and it's flashing, they actually say that they cannot see it, it's blind, right? And some of the signs of Allah like this, like you go outside, right? Like there's a beautiful day, the sun is out, the blue skies and the birds are flying, and you don't think of Allah. You just think a normal day, right? And it's that whole banner blindness. So I think this is why it's so important to have reminders and to go through the Book of Allah every day and these kind of things, so that it can constantly remind you. And I can imagine this is why Salah is so important, because you're constantly reminding yourself of Allah every single day, 5 times a day. Whereas imagine if Allah said, okay, no one has to pray, it's not compulsory, right? I can imagine people going weeks and months without thinking about Allah, even Muslims.
For sure. Yes, I think these rituals are definitely very, very helpful. It gives you at least some sort of a structure that you have to at least show up, even if your quality is not high, what have you. But being there, then you can talk about the quality. Then you can kind of step in and take it forward, for sure. So a lot of these habits are built into it. That if we take it perhaps to the next level of quality, that's what will lead to this Vasira, and having these consistent and constant reminders and these checkpoints or pit stops in our day, if you will.
Sure.
Great. So I think, so if we were to move on from this, and then the next thing sort of comes down to the Vasira about commands and prohibitions, right? So yes, sometimes people well, okay, I don't want to talk about the do's and the don'ts, and I just want to be all, hard and just knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, those commands and attributions are manifestations of you knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you actually believing in Him, and you believing in His commands, and so on and so forth. So he talks about once you have that sort of Vasira, then you're not finding ways to run away from it. You're not finding ways to find interpretations or excuses that, this does not apply today. And yes, it is nice, but this is better, and so on and so forth. All this jargon and argumentation that happens to find things to kind of work around it and find a way to escape those commands. But you actually understand it, you believe in it, you know that this is meant for you to be successful, for societies to be successful as an overall entity, and then you willfully commit to it. And look, you know what, I'm going to put in my best effort to make sure that this happens. Right, kind of like the example we were talking about earlier about the protein shake or the training regimen or your work ethics when it comes to training. If you trust your trainer, if you've seen him delivering results and you trust his knowledge and wisdom, it may be hard, but you're like, you know what, man, I'm committed to this training plan, I'm committed to this diet, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think this is actually an important point, right? We need to stop and think about this for a second, right? That when it comes to knowing Allah, okay, we like knowing Allah, we like knowing about His mercy, all these things. But when it comes to the time to actually do something for the sake of Allah, like something He's commanded, like praying, or it comes to the time to not do something, like Allah tells you to stay away from this sin, why is it at that point we do feel like, oh, I don't really want to be commanded too much, and I don't really want to, be restricted and do this and not do that and all of this. Why is that? I think a lot of this is actually to do with the ego again. And we discussed the ego very early on, right? Like the ego wants what it wants. And part of our success as human beings is realizing that we actually are here as Allah's slaves. And it's interesting because, we're kind of near the end of the year now, and I've been looking at planning, and we were talking about how I'm looking at my planning. And one of the things I do when I plan is I sit down and I write down, like, what is it that I want? Like, what do I actually want to achieve this year, like in the coming year, inshallah, right? And what was very interesting this year when I was planning, I wrote some really good stuff, and even stuff for the sake of Allah I wrote, right? Like, I want to do this, I want to do that. But then I took a step back and I thought to myself, you know what? Like, before I think about what do I want, maybe I should be thinking, what does Allah want from me? Like, what does Allah actually want from me? Like, if I've ever thought that, because when I'm planning, I'm kind of planning like I'm the master of my world, and I'm the one who's going to do this, and I want this, and I want that. But the way a slave thinks is actually very different. A slave thinks first of fulfilling everything that the master wants done, and then if he gets time, if he gets a chance, if he gets some opportunity, then he will go and do what he wants, right? So I had to kind of like really shake my mind up and think about this. And I think that with his commands, with his prohibitions, it's the same way that we get caught up in the dunya, right? Because Allah gives us so many blessings, we get caught up like, okay, this is my life and this is what I want to do, and we can very easily forget that this is actually Allah's life. This life He's given us, it belongs to Allah. We are His creation, and we need to fulfill His conditions, His commands, and all these things before we start focusing on what we want.
Beautiful. Yes. So the way I think about it, or at least try to, is that so you have these core responsibilities or core obligations, right? Which is sort of similar to even if you were to take a look at like from a corporate world or that you have these core things that you have to deliver on the mission and what have you. Obviously, another tangent point here is our corporations, our full-time job expects way more from us from core responsibilities perspective than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, right? In terms of like the basic prayers and what have you and so on and so forth. And then it's like for the rest of the time. It's like, okay, well, how do I make it to be more useful? And then obviously there are like so many different angles that you can make it useful, making sure that your core is taken care of. And as you engage in your other activities and your, above and beyond your core, or if you want to call it your nawafil, your extra or voluntary things, then it's a matter of, well, I do want to do it, but I still want to protect myself from not falling into haram, right? So you can do these extra things, but then maybe now you're being like unkind, or you're being like arrogant, or you're being transgressing some limits, or you're hurting people, or you are being a bit dodgy, or lying to people, whatever, right? Just to justify one angle or the other. So as you do those projects, and you still want to have those qualities of a believer, but then okay, well, what do I do to kind of maximize my impact or better use of my time and so on and so forth?
Yeah, and I think there's a really important point here that fundamentally, look, you need to know that whatever Allah has commanded you to do, it's actually good for you. Like, it is good for you, right? Like, when it comes to salah, sometimes we might think, oh, I have to pray this, that, and the other. But we don't realize that that is actually the best thing for us, right? It'll purify us, it'll clean us, it'll get us closer to Allah. Maybe that one salah will get you to Jannah. You have no idea what it is. But in the same way, anything Allah's asking you to stay away from, it's the same kind of thing. Like, when you start looking at the amount of deaths that happen from alcohol, the issues that come from it, and the families and this and that, you start to realize that there's a massive wisdom, there's infinite wisdom in the things that Allah has prohibited, in the things that Allah has encouraged us to do. And I think having that trust of our Master and having that trust of Allah to know that whatever Allah is telling us to do and not do, like, there's so much wisdom and it's so good for me. And just like you said, if it was a mechanic who was fixing our car and he told us to do this, we would follow it. If it was a doctor who told us to do this, we would follow him, right? So in the same way, when Allah says, listen, you know what? Stop what you're doing, go and pray, like, there's infinite wisdom and we need to follow that.
True. And yeah, if you can't, and sometimes like people would like say, well, you know what, we have so many bigger problems, and then let's not worry about this, right? But if you can't just do
Mm.
those basic things, how do you expect to do like the bigger things, right? And then that just goes with like any different area, like whether it be like business or your health or what have you. Like if you can't do like a basic push-up or you can't do like a 10-minute walk, that shows you, well, there's something else that's wrong, right? You don't have that sort of thing, and then that should help you diagnose that whatever it's that's preventing you from just even doing the basics.
And you know what you said there is actually really important. I don't know if you've ever read, there's this book called The Tipping Point. I think it's written by Malcolm Gladwell. And in that, he says that in the 80s or 90s, like the murder capital of the world was New York. And they said that it was all kinds of issues. But they said what they did is rather than just trying to go for the big murders and stuff, they started with the small crimes that were happening. Like, you know, people doing graffiti or people not paying fares on the underground and the smashed up windows in buildings. They said they focused on fixing these small minor things, and it actually transformed the much bigger crime as well. So inshallah, it's the same thing here, that if we can focus on the small things that we do in our day, that as a whole will actually make the ummah stronger and make us better, inshallah.
Sure. Beautiful. Okay. So I think, so as you were mentioning earlier, like what prevents us from doing this, right? And part of that is ego. Part of it is that we don't want to be told. And I think in other areas of life, people are willing to be told. People are willing to listen, and people are willing to follow those instructions, right? It's just a matter of either being unconscious or not being conscious or clear on like who is it that's telling them, right? Not realizing who
Mm.
Allah is and the
Yeah.
rights that we have on Allah and how it leads to our success and productivity and so on and so forth. So, which leads to the third area that he talks about in terms of the Vasira or insight is to have clarity of what Allah has promised, right? Whether it be in terms of promises of success and blessings and paradise and the state in paradise or the state of heart, as he says, like, you know, that in the dhikr of Allah, in the remembrance of Allah is where you will find that peace and so on and so forth, or Quran being the cure for your internal and external diseases and so on and so forth. So if you believe in those actual promises and good news and glad tidings, as well as the notion of warnings or warnings for punishment, that if you don't do that, right, nasullah fanasihum, right? So you forget Allah, you'll forget yourself, right? And having a restricted life, having a constricted life, someone who doesn't make his akhirah his primary concern will be just like running after different things. Will never find this sort of happiness. It will be just constantly running, and all these different things that are promises of Allah or warnings from Allah. If you have that sort of certainty, and yes, the timeline may not be yesterday, it may not be tomorrow, but it's definitely going to come. It may not be all that you will observe within this life. It may be some of that, or a lot of that will be in the hereafter. But once you have that sort of certainty and belief in that, then it's a different ball game, right? Unless you think, oh, well, okay, I can do this thing and Allah will forgive me. I'll do this thing, Allah will forgive me. Or you think that there's a switch that when I grow old, I can just flip that switch and then, you know, everything will be cleansed and I'll just have this full repentance.
Yeah, I think this is a really good part. Like if you think about some of the stories of the Sahaba, you start to realize what happens if you really have that certainty. Like, you know, there's a hadith about the Sahabi who's like, I can smell Jannah like beyond
Mhm.
the mountain, right? And when he could smell it, he just acted like he was just went out, and they were all like, we saw him fight like we didn't think someone could fight, you know. And this is the thing, that once you start to get this certainty, it actually brings about clarity for you, right? And this is the clarity we talk about from an insightful perspective, that if you knew 100% that you were going to meet Allah and that there's Jannah and this, and you saw it all, the way you would behave is completely different. And this is why when it comes to things like, you know, people who get very ill and they get told they don't have long to live, it becomes a certainty for them. Like it becomes a reality, right? That
Mhm.
basically, you know, I only have days, months, weeks, whatever it is to live. And therefore, everything changes for them because now they start to see things, right? They might suddenly realize that, hey, you know, that little argument I had, it's not important. And you know, that kind of job promotion I'll be waiting for, it's not that important. And really, the important things in my life are this and the relationships and Allah and this and this and this and this. And that level of clarity only comes when you have certainty, whether it's the certainty of death or whether it's the certainty of Allah or whatever it is. So I think certainty is very good, and it's something that we should try and develop. And you know, part of this is obviously asking Allah to make us more certain and making us increase in iman. But part of it is us taking actions as well. Like whether it's, watching programs like this or reading Quran or reading books that will actually increase our certainty as well.
Beautiful. Right. And I think it's just, if you were to connect that, right, it kind of all relates to this notion of who is Allah, right? So one of the things that, which is very different when it comes to the world, and when it comes to dealing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the world, like, many people know that, look, you can go the entrepreneurship route, you can do like a startup or what have you, but people will tell you that, what, 1 out of every 10 startups succeeds, right? And then, then you have 3 or 4 mediocres, and then, the others just like fully flop, right? So you'll be just like making your bare minimum salary, and then that's it. You have experience, but then you may not get the results. And I think that can obviously be tricky. That kind of prevents people from taking risks and what have you, because they don't know how successful they will be, and if they will hit the targets or the metrics that will make them happy. However, when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you have that sort of knowledge and sincerity that you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You're putting in your best effort, you're learning from your efforts, you're growing from that, you're becoming a better, stronger person. However, even if you don't see the numbers on your screen, or you don't see the numbers around you, whether it be financially or impact-wise, or number of beneficiaries you're impacting, or whatever, that, look, the reward is certain, right? I may not see it here, but Allah has noted it. This is who Allah is. He sees what's, as we mentioned earlier, right? Every action is rising up to Him, and commands are coming from Him, right? So those commands coming from Him may be the results that, okay, you know what, you put in that much effort, and whatever that project was or effort was, some of that is being blessed, right? So you're reaching out to 10K, 10,000, 100,000 people or beneficiaries, or, running a massive project of 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, or it's a $10,000 project, right? Regardless of that, those are what you're seeing today, right? But eventually Allah has promised that you will see the full results. And even in this worldly sense, how many companies are basically, they're evaluated really, really high, the stock price is really high, but they're still called like pre-profit, right? They haven't even, they're not even making profit, and their stocks are trading for like a couple of $100, right? How long? I don't know if Amazon is still in profit sector yet or not, but it took a really long time where it was still running as a pre-profit business, but still valued very high, because they were seeing the effort, they were seeing that progress and whatnot. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no like, what is it called? A and B testing, or what have something like that, right? Where you're kind of testing what will work, what won't work. But you're always rewarded for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you don't even have to worry about that.
Yeah, I think this certainty, it actually brings about a very different result, right? And I remember one of the courses that I did with one of the shuyukh, he was saying that one of the main reasons why people commit sins is because they forget that they're going to meet Allah, right? And if someone was certain they were going to meet Allah and that there was an akhirah, the way we behave would actually change, right? Like it would really, really change, because suddenly what happens is the lens with which you look at the world, it would be so different. Like right now, we might be in a situation, right, where like I have to, if I commit a sin right now, then I can be successful in the world. Okay, so if I have the lens on where I'm uncertain about the akhirah, I don't really know, like, yeah, I kind of believe it, but I'm looking at the dunya, which is certain and it's here in front of me right now, I'm like, that's a good option. Okay, but if I look at the akhirah and I think, hold on, if I refrain from this, and even if it hurts me now, it's actually going to benefit me in the akhirah, that changes the decision completely. And so your level of certainty, your level of insight into the akhirah, and remembering that you're going to meet Allah, it actually changes the way you think and the decisions you make.
Yes, absolutely. So, so I think, again, if we were to tie this whole thing together, right, and then one believes and realizes who Allah is, right? Yes. So I think the point I wanted to say, which kind of like slipped off, is that we are doing it for Allah, right? And that is really powerful. It's easier statement to say. It's a very cliche statement that, okay, well, what is your intention? Right? Are you doing it for Allah or for people, what have you? The whole ball game changes. If you're doing it for Allah, right? If you're really truly doing it for Allah, then, as you said, like, the results wouldn't matter, right? Those shortcuts where you might have an opportunity to take a shortcut or to do something that you may seem that, it seems like a win, or it seems like an accelerator in the next hour, but in long term, it's not a win. Right? Or that fear that, I will do it, but maybe I won't be successful. It's too hard. I'm putting in too hard. Whatever effort I'm making is too hard for me. I'm not cut out for that. But if you're doing it for Allah, then the whole metrics and the way that Allah sees your effort and the way Allah rewards your effort, the timeline, everything just changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so moving on, I think then he says, like, once you have these three stages or three layers to it, and you have these basira, that insight. So then what it leads to is this intention and aim, that now your irada, your aim, your will is dedicated for you to do a migration to Allah. Right? That's your intent. And when you are waking up, and you mentioned this earlier, right? That when you're thinking about what you're doing, it's like, okay, what does Allah want from me? Right? And that's it. So your aim and your focus is now, okay, I want to have a life and different elements of my life, different hours of my life, that Allah will be happy with me. That's it. So I'm not only trying to please Allah. I'm not trying to please my investors. I'm not trying to please my board. I'm not trying to please my shareholders, people around me, my friends, my donors, my employees, my customers, my clients, what have you, which can become very heavy, right? That if you have so many different types of people that you want to please and whatnot, but if you say, okay, I want to wake up and I want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's my intent, that's my aim, so that leads to this state of firm determination, where you have this truthfulness of intention that I'm going to do this journey to Allah. And this is what, in Arabic, it becomes this firm notion. It's called azm, right? That you have this firm determination, and that the determination now has two notions to it, or two levels to it, or two layers to it. One is, okay, I have made this intention. I'm going to start this journey. I'm going to start this route. I'm going to start this routine. I'm going to start adopting this identity, however you want to call it. And then the second thing of determination is to be determined, focused, disciplined, and consistent on that journey, along with the tawakkul on Allah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the key, that when it comes down to these kind of things, there's actually a switch. There is a switch between you realizing exactly who Allah is, what you're doing, and then that will actually result in something. And this is why the scholars, they say that Iman is not just belief in the heart. It's belief in the heart, it's profession by the tongue, speaking it by the tongue, and then acting on it with your limbs, with your body.
Great. Yeah, so this is what it builds down to, right? And then it goes back with the same thing that we talked about earlier about identity, right? Of even the Surah Al-Fatiha, right? That's a daily reminder of it. Your identity of being someone who submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has this intention to making Allah happy, making his life aligned with what Allah wants in the directions of Allah. And at the same time, you're relying on making dua to Allah. You're asking Allah for facilitation to have that journey continue, to have that effort to obey Allah, and for your efforts to then produce results. And in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it in a different way in Surah Al Imran. Allah says basically to commanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and us following his footsteps, that فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. So when you have this firm determination, this intent, this aim, then put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that's kind of what it boils down to, right? So you have this intention to live a lifestyle of that, you continue this journey, having this full determination and having this insight of the three areas that we talked about. You live your life by that day in and day out, and having your full reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Great.
So if you have any final thoughts to add to that, otherwise we can wrap this episode up.
Yeah, I think the last thing you said here about trusting in Allah, I think whenever I hear the word trusting in Allah, I always think to myself that you have to remember that when Allah makes a statement, it is stronger than the rules of physics. And the rules of physics are something that are very important to us, right? Like we all believe that gravity exists and water is this and that. And so when Allah says that whoever puts his trust in Allah, Allah will be sufficient for him, this is like a universal principle, and it's a rule. And so we should be very comforted by this, knowing that, look, I want to change and I'm still doing these sins, or I just can't do what I need to do and this and that. But you know what? I'm going to put my trust in Allah. I'm going to put my trust in Allah, and then I'm going to give it 100%. And if you do that, you can never, ever lose, inshallah.
Beautiful. Yeah, something just came through my social media this morning, and subhanAllah, it said something to the effect that a few years ago, decades ago, a doctor told the women that you will not be pregnant, you cannot be pregnant. right? And a few months later, the woman got pregnant, and she gave birth to the man that we know as Dr. Omar Suleiman today. So that's to the point of laws of physics versus the decree of Allah and putting trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, mashallah.
Okay, so with this, we'll wrap up, inshallah, and we'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay strong. Think about how you will implement these ideas and make it happen. Share your transformation, share your journey with us in the comments, and keep doing it. Have firm determination and be consistent. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.